The roots of modern Ukrainian nationalism can be traced back to the country's declaration of independence on January 22, 1918, after the revolution had dismantled the Russian Empire. Ukraine's brief existence as an independent nation ended in 1922, when the country was annexed to the Soviet Union by Vladimir Lenin. For a time, the leadership in Moscow tolerated and even encouraged various manifestations of Ukrainian nationalism. But in 1928, as part of his first five-year plan, the new Kremlin chief, Joseph Stalin, decided to put an abrupt end to it all. Stalin ordered the start of the collectivization of the Ukrainian lands, forcing landowners to surrender their land to the state, thus creating the collective farms known as kolkhoz. Many resisted, but to eliminate any challenge to his power, Stalin decided to vastly increase the quota of grains to be delivered to the state, causing the Ukrainian peasants to have their reserves completely emptied, which generated a gigantic famine that killed between 3 and 12 million people between 1932 and 1933, an event known today as the Holodomor. This tragedy, combined with the long-standing desire for Ukraine's independence and the immense repression exercised in the region by the NKVD, the ruthless Soviet secret police, instilled in a large number of Ukrainians an immense hatred towards the government in Moscow. Such circumstances meant that in 1941, after the German invasion of the Soviet Union, a considerable number of Ukrainians ended up collaborating with the Germans, even though Hitler's plans for the forced Germanization of the country were instantly and ruthlessly put in motion. Even though thousands of Ukrainians joined police forces and collaborated with the Germans in the widespread ethnic cleansing carried out there, an immensely larger number, nearly 5 million men and women, joined the Red Army after the liberation of Kiev in 1943, taking part in the final assault against the Third Reich over the next 2 years. Despite the victory in 1945 and the renewed patriotic feeling having spread across the Soviet Union, in the following years, Moscow's inability to reverse the country's stagnation that began in the 1970s made nationalist feelings intensify, and with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the nation finally achieved its long-awaited independence. However, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine suffered for years from systematic corruption, mismanagement, non-existent economic growth, devaluation of its currency, and a clear inability to secure the financing of public markets. After President Viktor Yanukovych's refusal to sign a treaty with the European Union in 2013, unprecedented civil unrest gripped Kiev and brought thousands of people to the streets, an event that erupted into violent clashes with the police and resulted in more than 100 dead, but led to Yanukovych fleeing the country and the election of a new government. Yanukovych's fall, however, also ushered in a period of great internal political instability in Ukraine, with separatist movements in the east of the country starting armed struggle against Kiev, particularly in the Russian-bordered regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. At the same time, Putin quickly ordered his forces to cross the Kerch Strait and occupy the Crimean Peninsula, a region of the highest strategic importance for hosting the large naval base of Sevastopol, which dominates the Black Sea. Crimea fell without much resistance, and the fear that Ukraine itself might fall to a rebel and foreign military offensive made the government consider that the military forces it had at the time were blatantly insufficient. And thus, on 13 April 2014, Kiev authorized the creation of paramilitary forces up to 12,000 fighters. Since the beginning of the crisis, a group of fanatical supporters of the Metalist Kharkov football club had formed a unit of urban vigilantes to patrol the streets of Kharkov against actions by separatist rebels. And using this unit as a backbone, it was founded on May 5th in the city of Berdyansk, located on the shores of the Sea of Azov, a paramilitary force dubbed Azov Battalion. The first commander of the Azov Battalion was Andriy Bieletsky, a lieutenant colonel of the Ukrainian police and notorious leader of the country's nationalist and supremacist movements, whose reputation attracted numerous like-minded volunteers to the unit, which quickly gave the Azov Battalion a reputation as a stronghold for neo-Nazis. The unit was then sent for training in Kiev by Georgian Armed Forces instructors, who had previous combat experience against Russia. At that point, the battalion had a force of 400 fighters and was financed by several Ukrainian magnates. In early August, the unit was declared fit and sent to the front lines, receiving its baptism of fire at the Battle of Marinka, where, supported by a mechanized army brigade, the Azov took control of the city from the Donetsk separatists. But on 28 of August, the separatists began an offensive along the coastal sector, capturing Novoazovsk and forcing Ukrainian forces to retreat to Mariupol. In early September, reinforcements were sent into the city, including the Azov Battalion, which immediately began training civilians to set up barricades and defend the urban perimeter. After intense artillery bombardment, on the 5th of September, a group of 7 Ukrainian T-64 tanks managed at great cost to repel an attack by 30 T-80 tanks from the Russian-supplied rebel forces. And in the following 3 days, the Azov was the protagonist in the hard fighting that kept Mariupol in Ukrainian hands, until a ceasefire was agreed. During this fighting, the Azov Battalion was formally accused by the United Nations of having committed several war crimes, such as looting, illegal arrests, rape and torture, as well as numerous attacks on racial minorities and social groups. According to the report presented by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, members of the battalion allegedly tortured with electricity and water several sympathizers of the rebel forces to obtain from them confessions of involvement with the separatist movement. Another controversy involving the battalion is its common use of symbology analogous to Nazism, such as a version of the Wolfsangel, an ancient German heraldic symbol adopted by the Third Reich, and the Schwarze Sonne, or Black Sun, a ceremonial symbol developed for use by the SS. Several volunteer battalion members identified themselves as neo-Nazis, with many being spotted wearing swastikas and SS runes on their uniform, causing the unit to make headlines around the world, earning itself a bad reputation. Bieletsky, who was personally known for having delivered supremacist and anti-Semitic speeches, enjoyed the high prestige he had achieved after the fighting and managed to be elected deputy of the National Assembly in 2014, leaving Azov shortly afterwards. In the same period, the battalion began an effort to depoliticize itself, and several of its members left the unit to form the National Core Party, to which Bieletsky joined. One of only 2 Azov members to be elected to the National Assembly so far, Bieletsky has had a poor record as a parliamentarian, and despite using virulent rhetoric in his addresses, he took part in only 2% of the votes cast during his tenure, failing to pass any proposed law and completely absenting himself from sessions as of 2017. In the 2019 elections, his party obtained such an inexpressive vote that it was unable to re-elect him or elect any other parliamentarians. On November 11, 2014, shortly after their victory at Mariupol, the Azov Battalion was elevated to Azov Regiment and inducted into the Ukrainian National Guard, taking orders from the Ministry of the Interior, as well as constant shipments of heavy weaponry and high public and private funding. In late March 2015, despite the signing of a second ceasefire agreement, Azov continued to prepare for war, and the Interior Ministry announced that the unit would be among the first to be trained by the US Army troops on its training mission, Operation Fearless Guardian. However, assistance was suddenly cut off on June 12, when the capital passed an amendment blocking any aid, including weapons and training, to the regiment due to its neo-Nazi links. The amendment, however, was annulled just 5 months later. That same year, Azov professionalized its training and recruitment process, in which new volunteer recruits undergo a strict curriculum review, in a structure similar to that used by the Ukrainian army. The unit also assumed the organizational structure that it still uses, specializing in reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance, explosive material disposal, terrain interdiction, and special operations, with a battery of field artillery, 2 battalions of special forces, and a battalion of tanks. Azov holds its public relations program in high regard, and its modern website has become the most used channel for recruiting foreign volunteers, including elements from European, North American, and Russian origins. In February 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the invasion of Ukraine under the premise of demilitarizing and denazifying the country, in a direct reference to the Azov Battalion and its political roots. With the fighting turning into a slow war of attrition in the following days, Russian forces, supported by the Donetsk separatists, once again advanced on Mariupol, but the city had its perimeter fortified by the Azov Regiment, resisting capture so far. Mariupol, however, has become a major target for the incessant barrages of the heavy-caliber Russian artillery, which also uses cruise missiles and bombing aircraft to hammer the city. The Azov Regiment, armed with the most modern anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons provided by Western powers, is being engaged in combat in the city of Mariupol and other locations in eastern Ukraine. Its current commander, Major Denis Prokopenko, apparently leads the regiment, which currently numbers more than 1,000, straight from the front line in Mariupol, and is at the forefront of the organization's media effort to establish itself as an elite unit of the Ukrainian armed forces, in the incessant battle of propaganda that daily disputes the sympathies of the world during the current Russo-Ukrainian War.